All right, Cameron, it's great to have you on today. I'll just start with some context on you. So, Cameron is the founder and CEO of Hover, which is Canada's first publicly available drone delivery service to the Toronto Islands. And you studied at Queen's, which is where I go. You studied at Western, U of T, all before doing your master's at the Smith School of Business, where you kind of focused on venture capital. You also have a ton of experience in the entrepreneurial world between starting many of your own businesses and then working with various entrepreneurial communities such as, Techstars, seen you on Dragon's Den. So super excited to have you on today, Cameron, and looking forward to hearing more about your story.
Thanks for having me, James.
Perfect. So I kind of want to get a very quick glimpse into what your childhood was like because I feel like that can paint more of a full picture of the entrepreneur. So, what were your interests as a kid? Were you into sports, school? Tell me about it.
Definitely sports. I absolutely loved it. I was the gym is my favorite sport type kid. I so lucky though because my mom would literally force me to sit down and just read, and there would be a constant supply of new books. So I was blessed to have good literary skills growing up, and I think that really enabled me to kind of cruise through high school. And then university was a hilarious sort of adjustment because you had to relearn how to study when you kind of if you have good literary skills in high school, you can kind of bullshit your way through a lot of different things. But you can't really do that in university. But kind of going back to as a kid, I feel like you listed off like a bunch of cool accomplishments, but it's like it's such a journey to
Mhm.
go through a lot of that, and it's over such a long time horizon that it's like sometimes I think, hey, I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing, and having the ability to zoom out and just be like, hey, you're on the right track, it's okay, is really helpful to do. But I think my dad was an entrepreneur. That definitely is probably the only reason why I've been doing it as long as I have. He had just been such a positive influence. My whole family is just kind of full of them, and that is something that is super important because it normalizes some of the struggles that you go through, and it helps make it easy to say, hey, this is a normal part of it. And so when that's the case, it's not sort of, oh, you don't have a ton of money, or you have to move in with your grandparents because it's not going well, or you have to do X, Y, and Z to reduce your burn rate. It's all normal stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think it forces you to kind of get scrappy. And it also is the type of thing where I also want to kind of make them proud. And so there's a bit of that underlying desire to work really hard for yourself and to kind of make a name for yourself in a way, I think, which is kind of a exciting thing. I think everybody wants that, but it's especially different when you have these positive influences in your life. So you're able to kind of get good opinions on what works, what doesn't, without having to always fail yourself. And so that's another sort of blessing. Although sometimes I'm sure I need that lesson myself instead of just listening to my parents. So even now, they're like parents are pretty much always right. And they're basically us, just a little bit older. And every time I kind of talk to them and or hang out with them around my friends are always like, you guys are exactly the same. And so it's the type of thing where it's always good to listen to your parents because even though it's a different generation, the context they have, everything that they've gone through, it's exactly the same. It just wrapped slightly differently.
Yeah. I imagine having a family of entrepreneurs also helps with the tough times too, because when you have those setbacks, it's pretty easy to tell
Oh yeah.
yourself, okay, this isn't working. But when you have that uh, external person removed from the company around the house who can, coach you out of those tough times, I'm sure that's really
Yeah,
helpful.
well, I mean, he is the chair of the board too, my dad. So that was, we made a joke about that, and then I was like, yeah, why not? Honestly, it makes more sense to have you do that given your experience, and absolutely, I think the biggest thing is sort of pain tolerance is really high, and I think doing athletics my whole life throughout Queens, I was on the cycling team for my second year onwards, and just in general seeking out that discomfort is, I think, really important because it changes the mindset a little bit from like, oh, I have to go for a run, I have to do all these difficult
Yeah.
things, or I have to train for this, to like, you get up, be disciplined, do something that makes you feel amazing, feel great about yourself. It makes your body look good, you feel good, it gives you more endurance to be able to work super long days. And everything kind of is intertwined as well. So when you get to have the ability to do that, and when you're lucky enough to be in the shape to do that, and it changes the mindset a little bit, and it also makes you more grateful because everything, like, life is hard, And so having the ability to kind of understand that and be okay with it, I think makes some of the challenges of entrepreneurship a little bit easier.
Yeah, I wanted to get into because I know you've done marathons. I think you've done even an Ironman. So what kind of role has that played in your life, and where did your interest for that kind of start?
Huge, huge, man. It I think it started so kind of hilariously. I never was really the kid that had like the inhaler, but I had asthma. And so I would always like refuse to take it because I didn't want to, because I wanted to try to like push through it. But my asthma was so bad growing up, man. I had to be hospitalized a couple times, and I have like allergy induced asthma. So sort of dog, cat, anything like that would cause the asthma reaction to occur. And what I noticed in high school was that the more cardio I did, the less sensitive those reactions became. And so I would say it's probably like grade 10 where I started doing running, lifting weights more, and like actually training with some of my buddies from school. And so it made it really helpful. And so when I went into Queens, I was already in good shape, and that kind of just started accelerating. And then the cycling team, I played a lot of soccer as well. And then obviously doing cycling is just so cardio intensive that that really helped as well. And then from there, when I graduated, I moved in with a bunch of guys. Shout out to Braden, who's a fantastic, phenomenal athlete. He was co-captain of the Ultimate Frisbee team at Queens. And we would do a lot of running and working out together. And then it just kind of spiraled from there where I was like, yeah, let's try a marathon. Why not? And I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And then it just kind of spiraled from there.
That's really cool. How did you like obviously I've done a 70.3 before, which is nothing compared to the full thing, but how did you manage to do like training on top of everything else you have going? Because that's a big sacrifice.
It was a chaotic summer. Holy, that was 2022. So January was when we launched the drone delivery portion. Like I've been doing Hover now for we're approaching 6 years. I think we just passed our 6 year anniversary actually. And so for 2 years while I was at Queens, it was kind of like a side hustle where I
Mm.
would do real estate, commercial, that sort of stuff where I would map and take pictures of different properties in Kingston and Toronto. And it when I graduated, I actually ended up working for the government of Canada for like a year. And this was kind of my side project. And as it grew, it became so obvious that this was the move. And this was kind of during COVID where I was living in Ottawa with the guys and I just decided to go full time into it. And so never look back, and we're now 4 years into it. So it's it's been a phenomenal time.
Where did that conviction kind of stem from when you realized like, okay, Alvar is like, this is what I want to do after school? Like, how did this all start? Was it just you trying to build it throughout your university days, or like where did that start?
Yeah, man. I mean, it definitely was my grandpa who kind of pushed me to it. I did the Quick C program at Queens, which is the Queens Innovation Summer
Yeah.
Center initiative, I believe, and that was fantastic. They gave us, I think it was like 7 grand each for the summer, and then we also got 4 grand for the company. So it was like you got paid money to start a business basically, which
Hmm.
is a pretty amazing time. And you're with a bunch of people your age, so we'd go golfing, we'd all hang out, like we had a bunch of parties and stuff like that. And summer in Kingston is phenomenal. I'm not sure if you've ever done it, but it just is like all the ads for Queens when I first was looking at it was like the most beautiful green summery. We get like a month of that in September to October, and then it just is cold all the time. And then right as it becomes nice, everyone goes home. So it's
Yeah.
like I had one amazing summer like that, and it was just 10 out of 10. So that's kind of how it started, and then it just kind of continued. And as for the conviction, I think you never really are sure. Like everybody who kind of can say things with certainties is usually wrong about things. A more s- safe approach is to kind of think of things in probabilities of like, even if I might fail, the probability of success is worth that risk. And it's like, who cares? You spend a couple years working and it doesn't work out. But that experience, as long as you're moving in the right direction, that experience is so positive. And you don't know that from the start. And I think that's why people glamorize entrepreneurship, because the people who do succeed, it's such a big risk. And you kind of just have to take that risk at times. Even if you have no plan, I think the one thing that I've been reading a little bit more lately, and the best entrepreneurs actually do have sort of risk mitigation plans. And so the best advice I think I heard was don't just try to start a business and expect it to grow super fast. And like if you have a nice job, somebody had tweeted about this, which is honestly great advice. Do the bare minimum at the job. Like most online jobs, get a fully remote job. That's like if you're performing well at that job, you could realistically work 4 hours a day. I know many people who work less than that, especially during the pandemic. And you have now your remaining day. And so if you can be disciplined, you can pull it full 8 hours in while also putting 4 hours into your full-time job, have all your expenses covered. And that's probably the smartest thing to do. Many of the smartest entrepreneurs we're doing risk mitigation.
Yeah.
So it, that's such an important lesson to be like, it's not always like there are points in which you do need to go all in, and that is important. But it's almost like hiring. Like you're gonna know when you need to hire if you get to that point because you just literally can't do everything. If
Mm-hmm.
you can do everything and you can still be like, oh yeah, I'm okay, you probably don't need to hire. And so
Yeah.
there's a different like if you're so overwhelmed you literally can't fulfill orders or you can't process customer requests, that's a sign you should hire people. But pretty much before, like you should almost wait until you're so overwhelmed, like you're on the other side of that, where you have kind of extended yourself a little too far. And that's okay because now you know the boundary. Now you kind of have more information to be like, maybe you still can have a job, or maybe you hate the job and it's wrecking your desire to do the other work. So you want to quit for that reason. There is sort of a buddy of mine, Braden Ream, actually talked about it, where it's almost like you don't want to live at home in certain points because that safety net is hard to kind of move out of. You almost want to create an environment where there is an opportunity to fail, even if it's relatively safe. Like you live with your buddies, your rent's 1,200-1,500 a month. So you got to now get 1,200-1,500 a month from your job. So it's like,
Yeah.
how do you do? Well, you got to find a way to do that, and you will probably work harder than if you're living at home. Oh, even if your parents charge you rent, it's probably less. And even that, it's like, oh, you missed it. Oh, don't worry, James. It's all. And it's like you can't really put yourself in that situation because that's not A, realistic, and B, it's not giving you the drive to kind of make something stick because there's going to be a lot of shit you throw at the wall that won't stick. And so you
Yeah.
got to make sure that like what does stick is something that is scalable, repeatable. And then also, I'm a solo founder, but a lot of people out there recommend getting co-founders, and
Yeah.
there's a big reason for it. And it's nice now because it's like we raised a little bit of cash. I get to allocate that however I want, but it is important to be able to work hard, be consistent. And I think that's a good lesson at the beginning. I wasn't always. And so now I've kind of developed strategies to know what to do. But it took me 3-4 years to do that. So it's like there are many ways to be quicker. And so that's also important to kind of recognize that there's not a right way to do it, but there are sort of best practices that if you want to maximize your chances of success, you should try to follow them.
I want to jump into other, Cameron, but before we do that, speaking of jobs, did you ever consider doing a job at a university or did you do one?
Yeah, man. I was doing a lot at once actually. I graduated Queens. I so in my last year in my undergrad, I did a essentially my like thesis for my fourth year economics degree was to do this sort of paper on essentially the state of indigenous reserves in terms of proximity to sort of dense geographical location. So it's like it's a little bit complicated to try to explain, but we essentially ran a regression analysis on the locations in which you had indigenous reserves to city centers, and we found that the closer they were to a city center, so the closer they had access to, for example, transit, the more economic opportunities that would exist to them. And so we were kind of trying to see which reserves were doing better, why was that the case, and making summaries as a result of that to potentially make recommendations to have systemic changes in the future to increase the amount of people who had jobs, to increase the ability for people to kind of have independence and build sort of wealth for themselves into the future. And so that I guess caught the attention of some of the people in Indigenous Services Canada. So I got a job offer there immediately out of school, and I thought, what a great opportunity! I could travel beyond reserve a little bit, spend time, learn, and it was one of those things where it was like it was a pretty standard entry level role, but I mean, government paid well. It was like my sister was working in government too. It was a very exciting opportunity for me, I felt, with the limited job experience. And so I took it, and it was just one of those things where it's like, just you don't really like it, straight up, it just wasn't that great. I think, not to shit on government, but the reality is with some government jobs, you're not really the incentives don't align as well as you think they do. Whereas like BDR roles, the incentives are aligning. If you kill it, if every call you make, you close a deal, you will be a rich man in a year. Like, just straight up, you will. You'll get headhunted by other people, you'll get promoted. And so it's like those are good incentives. Whereas in this job, the incentives didn't really align. And that's
Yeah.
something, especially as a leader, I really try to do all the time, is like you have to like align people's incentives to kind of get the best results possible. And so for me, what I noticed is that I just like we it just wasn't really something that I wanted to do long term. And
Yeah.
I think that's the most important realization that I came to really quick. And so when the contract that I had was up, it was like a year or something like that. I left, and that kind of what made my decision, because I started getting more traction. So things just happened really perfectly, where it was like I got a little bit of traction, and that first summer, this was 2020, was the best summer, because I was just like, I had no idea what I was doing. I was trying my best to do. I was like a BDR and the people doing the work, and I was invoicing, I was doing everything. But that's the reality of when you're starting a business. And every small win I would get was just so powerful, and it just motivated me to keep going, to keep pushing. And you just get lucky. I think you get prepared, you be in the space, and you don't know what's going to happen. And so it really took me a year to figure out the governance, the structure. We were doing a lot of pitch competitions, didn't have a ton of cash. And then it kind of shifted when I got into this program called Next 36. And these incubators were the best thing, because they gave me a little bit of structure in a time in which I didn't really have as much, because I was kind
Hmm.
of running the business on my own. And so we had some employees at the time, but I didn't really know how to manage them. Like, I'm like, what, 21 years old? I don't know what I'm doing. And so kind of having that structure from people who had been through it, meeting people who are further ahead than you, it really pushed me to learn and grow. And I think also even just to understand more about the venture space, because at the same time that I was doing my job in Ottawa, I was essentially going to Queen's for my master's degree
Yeah.
there. So that was a pretty big sort of time for me to understand a little bit more about like what raising money looked like for a company, how to structure it. And so I was very thankful I had that. Like, we talked, Peter Gallant helped me a lot with that, actually understanding about term sheets, raising money. And now it's really funny because everyone just raises off safes. And so it's a little bit different than what I learned, but it's cool to kind of see that progression of, instead of more of like private equity, it's actually more just safes with no conversion yet. And so I think there's so many different things that I learned as a result of that, that I feel so grateful to go through all these programs like the Techstars, Next 36,
Hmm.
and then even Dragon's Den. But Dragon's Den is, we could talk about that later. It's more of like the experience of it. That's, I think, what really was exciting about it.
So just to clarify, you were at your government job, you were also working, or you were also doing your master's program. That wraps up. You're now able to scratch your itch of your entrepreneurial venture, which is Hover. And what is your goal in this like first couple months to a year of starting this thing? Like, do you have customers at this point? Or you said you were trying to raise money. What were you like really trying to do to pave a road, a clear road to then take action on?
Get revenue. That was
Yeah.
it. It was like I wasn't really focused on building like a big, massive, scalable business. It was like we needed to get revenue in, whether that
Yeah.
was from photography, videography, marketing. We got a bunch of cool clients that year. We got Aston Martin in. This was when FPV drones, you had to kind of make them to be able to do them. We put a GoPro on top. We got some footage in a commercial there. We worked with RCMP, CTV News, like a bunch of these big clients, and then a big commercial real estate firm, CBRE, in the States as well. And so then we got a good amount of deal flow coming in, where I was then traveling, and I was just still doing a lot of the filming myself. We had in-house editors that would edit the footage. And so at this point, it was more of like cinematic,
Yeah.
which I loved. But at the same time, I also noticed that like it being a drone operator, it's hard to differentiate yourself. You really need to add value. And so this is around the time where I started to say, what would be a good way to do that? Well, doing surveying and mapping for construction companies is a fantastic way to do that. And so
Mm.
that's kind of what I started to get more into. We built relationships with like Tridel, PCL, Ellis Don, some of these big boy construction firms. And we were able to do essentially mapping for them. And so we still have contracts with them that we do now just because they're so profitable. But the difference is now we have pilots that kind of go out and do it themselves. And so then they send us the footage, we process it, upload it, and send the deliverable off to the client. And that is still like you need revenue to do anything.
Yeah.
You have no revenue, you're not going to really raise any money. The only people who have no revenue and who raise money are absolutely phenomenal people. And the reality is that's so rare now. Like maybe you could have done that in 2021, but you almost need to be like a SpaceX or like a phenomenal engineer that says, I'm quitting my job and I'm going to work on this. And the reason investors are investing in that person is because these people have such a high opportunity cost. They're making 400,000 USD a year. And this is not an exaggeration. I know for Canadians, that number seems pretty crazy. It's not at all. Like these are, if you're a relatively accomplished person and you're working in like any high paying job, Google, Meta, Amazon, like these guys are all pulling in 500,000 at least in total comp
Mhm.
USD. And so it's not unusual for that to happen. And so the reason why investors will put money into these companies is because that is such a high opportunity cost for these people that if you have the conviction to do that, an investor says, I want to support you because I believe in you. You're seeing what's happening next year at the cutting edge of technology. You're one of the smartest engineers out there. And so anyone who kind of thinks they can just go start because they have a cool idea and raise, especially in Canada, you're going to get slapped around a little bit
Yeah.
because we had a cool idea. We had traction. We had like 20,000 a month that we were pulling in at one point when we were trying to raise, and we were getting no's from investors in Canada. They
And
just didn't.
at that point, were you guys also like focused on the food delivery aspect, or was that a later pivot?
That was when we first started raising. That was a later pivot. We were
Yeah.
doing other stuff with like public safety, and it ended up just like what I had realized is it really is about the team. And so part of the reason we got no's was A, because I'm an inexperienced founder at that point. And that it is like, it's not, I don't take it personally. It kind of is what it is. Like
Yeah.
if I'm 22 trying to raise $500,000, it's like, you better have a damn good reason for that. So it's like, even if I had thought that the revenue was enough justification, but the revenue is almost the baseline. You know,
Yeah.
it's not the only thing that matters, and it might get you in the door and get these calls. And so what that did is it gave me a thick skin, and it also just gave me an understanding to do it. Because the reality is, it's like I don't really know what I'm doing at this point. I still don't really know what I'm doing, but the more that I learn by actually operating, the more that I get information to be like, okay, that's not how you do a call. This is how you should do it. And asking for advice too. Like I have so many friends now in the ecosystem as a result of me doing that, that it means I can call upon people and ask for their help, to ask for guidance, to kind of learn from. And that's the most important thing that I really got from that. So
I wanna go back to like getting, you said revenue was the main target in the first year. Obviously that meant you had to approach customers and be pretty salesy and be
oh yeah.
top of your game, top of your sales game. So what was that experience like, pitching to people, trying to get people on board, and getting like hearing no's, because that's tough.
Yeah, it is super tough. It was brutal. I allotted 4 to 6 hours every day for the first 4 months or so of just we had a lead list, go through it. And so usually calling people because I felt if I could get them on the phone, there was all this info online. I could send them a bunch of demos. And I think the key here is just learning how to interact with certain people, doing the research. Sometimes I would get lazy and just call people. I would not know much about it. And it like just doing it is the most important thing, and doing it with no guarantee of pay. But then when you get some of that, you're like, oh, wow, this actually is worth it. And so it just was such a fun and challenging environment, and doing it myself and figuring it out. And even though I could have kind of probably done it in more effective ways, kind of just trying a way that I think might work, and then saying yes or no, that doesn't work. I think that's also powerful of having the autonomy to like do it yourself a little bit and figure that out, because it's like it will succeed or fail based on me. And even if it fails, I learn something from that. And
Yeah.
so the biggest thing is like I think I'm a pretty sort of tough-skinned person. And I think that's a result of kind of doing these calls where you get people who say no and just laughing it off. It also is so helpful, the environment you're in. This was kind of peak COVID time. Having a bunch of guys who you have been friends with for years in an environment where you can, at the end of the day, it's like 6 or 7 p.m., you stop work and you get to go have dinner with them. You get to go outside and play spike ball. You get to go work out with them. Like, that's just huge. You get to have lunch with them. These are the things that when you live with people, and I live alone now pretty much, and I actually kind of miss it. Like, it's just a quiet spot in my apartment in downtown Toronto. And I'm like, oh, that's like, I talk to the guys all the time. And so I think it's important to have your environment set up for that,
Yeah.
where it's almost like if you fail, that's okay. It's like you're surrounded by heart. Everyone's working all day long. We had two other guys in the apartment. We would be interacting with each other all the time, and it's just okay to fail. And that's like, if you have supportive friends as well, that's so crucial, because then it's
Yeah.
like, Ken, how's it going? How's the day going? You get any good leads. You get people's opinions. It helps if you're like in with other sort of people that are working in a similar field, get their opinion. Everyone has an opinion too. And so it's nice to hear, because you might not think of things and you're imperfect. And so I would say always be open to be wrong, because that's you most of the time are wrong. And I think that's okay. So
I want to hear about maybe one of the biggest challenges Hover has had to go through, because obviously in every startup there's a major roadblock or a point in time where you think this thing is it's gonna fail, it might not succeed. So I maybe share an experience if you have something like that, or what you tell yourself when you have an experience like that.
yeah, man, the biggest, hilariously, this sounds really funny, but the more money you raise, the more pressure you put yourself under. And I think that is actually by design. So if you do say yes to investment, that is okay, but you have to be aware of what you're signing yourself up for. And it depends on who you take money from. If you take money from VC firms, you are having a pressure from them to be able to perform and multiply the value of your company from what you take the money at, which is usually in the millions of dollars of valuation. And I think a quick note here for Canadians, especially when people hear that, they're like, oh, on paper, the company's worth X. The company isn't worth 5, 6, $7 million. Like, nobody's paying that for the company. The point is you set yourself up to value the company at higher and higher levels in the future. And that is by design. So the reality, when you see like even Y Combinator, some of the guys I lived with in San Francisco, and I'm going back, they're raising money at 20 million USD valuations. Many of them are pre-revenue, or they have very limited revenue. The
Mm-hmm.
company is not actually worth 20 million US dollars. And so the point here is that you are setting yourself up and giving a small amount of equity away at that valuation, because as it grows and potentially becomes $1 billion company, that's what they want. That's what these investors want. And even though it's a low likelihood, you have to structure the company in a way that gives yourself the best chance possible. And Y Combinator is one of those things. It's an insane number of unicorns that come from it.
Yeah.
And again, much of this equity is never liquid. So on paper, you're one thing, but you're never going to actually see that in your bank account. So that's another important distinction. Um, but going back to kind of when you raise money, you have external pressures that come in, and you can manage those. A lot of the times people think, oh, you have to do what the investors say. Like, I'm a solo founder. I can do whatever I want. I could shut the company down. But the point is, it's like, I would never do that, because you would ruin the reputation and never get an additional dollar in the future from these investors, because that's not what you started the money for. You want to do everything in good faith. And you want to sort of, when you take money, if you're pivoting, you want to let them know. Many times you want to give them the opportunity to take the money back if you're doing something completely different than what they put in for, even if you don't have to. And so this is something it's very common, where it's like the entrepreneurship community, once you're kind of in, it's not as big as you think it is. Like, realistically, if you go in Canada, there might be only a couple hundred really solid entrepreneurs. And once you kind of establish yourself as one, I don't even think I really am one at this point. I'm still learning and growing, but if you can establish yourself as one, and go to these events and do these things enough, you get known enough in the community where people understand what you're doing. they might offer to give you money. Opportunities will start coming to you. And so branding is super important, posting a ton. I just been posting a lot on LinkedIn lately, and it's
Hmm.
crazy the amount of people who are messaging me saying, hey, I see your posts. And so the visibility you can get from doing things as basic as posting consistently for a couple weeks, that's huge. I actually started shit posting, highly recommend it too, where it's like you get so much more engagement from it, and it's totally satire. I think one of the ones was like,
Yeah, what
uh,
is that?
so like it's difficult when you have an actual boss. Say you're like consulting at Deloitte. You can't really be shit posting about consultants and like but I can. I can talk shit about consultants at Deloitte because it's like the consultants are getting paid like 30, 40 an hour, but they're billing $250. These are 21-year-olds. Consultants are supposed to be experts in what they're doing. These guys have no idea what they're doing, and that's okay. But it's also like it's funny to joke about it. At least for what I joked about was something like grinding and hustling as a founder to cut my costs. I found a way to cut my grocery bills per month by 25%, and it was fasting for a week. So I just don't eat for a week and my grocery bills are 25% less. And it's like so obviously satire, but you'll get people who are commenting, yeah, man, that's a great idea. Like I've only fasted for 4 days, and you know they're serious, and you're like, the cool
Yikes.
part about LinkedIn is you have everyone on. You got like 18-year-olds and you got 60-year-old like C-suite veterans.
Yeah.
So LinkedIn is probably one of the best ways to connect with people because you have that. And also, people are funny. And it's like my post about, or I think I said another one, which was like, I ran the Toronto Marathon had and how it created shareholder value. And then I go, oh, just kidding, guys. Have a great Monday. And everyone was like, oh my God. I got so many texts being like, I was about to like shit all over you and criticize you. And like, then it's like, oh, I saw it was a joke. And I was like, oh, thank God, Cameron. Because just you don't want to be that guy who's cringe. So if you can lean into that a little bit, the interaction that you get from it, you are the one who started that. And you are
Yeah.
almost driving that conversation. And that helps when you need to like say I need to get a job. I'm so confident in my ability if I ever did need to do that. And I don't even want one. I'm in like I wish I had, if I had this option when I graduated, there's no way I would have done entrepreneurship because I would have applied for a really cool job and wanted to work there. But
Yeah.
now it's interesting to see how that shifts. So it, the biggest challenge I would say is think very carefully about when you raise money because it's so great when that money hits your account and you're like, I could do all of these things, but then you get 6 months in and you have to ensure that you're following the things that you said you would. And so just be careful when you do it. There's power to having complete control, and like you don't want to have to. Also, don't take bad offers. There's so
Hmm.
many founders who will take really shitty offers from investors because the investor believes in them, but they want to take like 40% of the company. Like, don't do that. If you have a cool idea, like go to Silicon Valley and try to raise money there. Like you'll get investors who will absolutely blow the valuations and the amount of money out of the water. Like I played pickleball with a guy, and then the next day, he was like, "Hey man, I'd love to invest." It's like one
That's
meeting.
so
That's
cool.
it. And so it's very, very different.
Is
Whereas the
that the difference between like being in a Silicon Valley where there's that kind of opportunity versus,
oh yeah,
Toronto? Yeah. So to any
and Toronto's not
entrepreneur,
bad, but you just like the deal sizes are smaller. You're doing it in
yeah,
Canadian dollars, so the 30% less. What I would recommend for anyone is the smartest people I know have gotten a job in the States. And if you really love Canada, make it a fully remote job and work in Toronto. You get paid with the localized dollar value of whatever it is. Even if it's 80K USD, that's like 110,000 Canadian. And
yeah,
so it's like 80K USD, by the way, is not a lot of money in the States if you're like a high performer. And so it's like there are many managers of fast food joints who are making 80K USD. And I'm not shitting on them. I'm just saying that's the reality of it, where it's like you got to think bigger. Where it's like 110 Canadian starting salary. I don't know, maybe it's you can tell me like that's a pretty good job
yeah, that's high.
out of school. And so it's like that's if you want to be like a PM or something like that in Silicon Valley, the jobs starting are like 150K USD. And so
Hmm.
yes, it's hard to get those. But this is again where posting, being in the community, once you have a big enough of network here, you're going to notice many people are coming back and forth like what I did. And so
Yeah.
getting that connection in is super crucial. So I would recommend for people like raising USD without exception. That's like the only way you should do it. Even if you raise less, you get a 30% bump. And also more
Hmm.
than that, the valuations are way better. So people are willing to take 0.5% of a $7 million company, or 0.5% of a $5 million company and give you like 100 grand. And so these are the things that people don't really tell you as much, just even VC firms and angel investments here are much smaller. And so you got to be aware of that. That's okay to take money here. It just is smaller. And if you can take money here, you can probably take money from people in the States because it's like they're so risk adverse here. If you're getting yeses here, you can
Probably
probably
give over
get
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it just is good. I try to share that as much as I can because like the VC don't really want you to know that. And it's not that they are trying to prevent you. It's just the nature of the operation is they want you to say yes to them. And if they
Hmm.
like you, they don't want you to go look elsewhere. And but money is money. It's not really differentiated that much. And most VCs don't actually do as much as you think. They wire the money into your account and that's pretty much it. And they'll send you articles or something. It's like they don't really help that much.
Sure, I had to sneeze there.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, well, Cameron, I know we're almost at time here. So I kind of just wanted to wrap up with one quick question. Um, and this is a question I've kind of asked some, I guess, but what advice would you offer to maybe, someone picture yourself back when you were in your fourth year of university, you're passionate about entrepreneurship, but you don't really know where to start. What advice would you give to someone like that?
If you don't know where to start, you got to do like an inventory of what you like to do. And I think a lot of people kind of have that where they don't know where to start. You have to be doing something that sets yourself up for success. And so it might mean get a job, whatever it is, and it might mean just save up money because the more runway that you have, the more freedom you have to sort of change things. You could start something, oh, it was a mistake, go back. You just have to kind of move forward. If you're doing nothing, you have to try something. It doesn't matter what it is, and do something that you like to do. But you also have to understand that it's like sometimes that will not always intersect with what makes money. And
Yeah.
so it's like, I love doing drone stuff, but I don't always want to wake up and go fly. Like sometimes people will talk about, oh, you came with like Cameron, you should have bought your drone for this. And I'm like, I fly drones all the time. I don't want to fly my drone. And so it's like sometimes I get tired of it, but the reality is it's also that makes me money. And so it's like I will have to do things that sometimes I may not always want to wake up and fly drones because it adds to the long-term vision. And you just got to be disciplined with it. Like if you can wake up every day, work 4 hours a day on your remote job, save up money, and then put 4 hours a day. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be a Shopify store. It could be literally anything. And you probably are going to be able to succeed. I
Yeah.
would say that if I really could do it over again, I would probably try to do exactly what I said, like get a job in something that is remote, that I enjoy, that's not brutal, like probably not sales to be honest, because that's harder, but like a PM or something, that's like an okay job, whatever. And then I do something called indie hacking, which is basically starting up these small projects and just launching them quickly. Most are going to fail, most are going to get no traction, but the ones that actually stick are going to do really well. And those are the ones that require very little input. Once they're set up, you're good to go. And then learning more technical skills. I'm still learning now, but getting like, you don't want to have to outsource or hire somebody to do some of the work. Like you want to be able to do it in-house. And
Yeah.
so if you can learn that yourself, and then ship quick and ship over and over and over again. And then once you read a lot and you're in the community and you're on Twitter and LinkedIn and you're talking to entrepreneurs and you go to these events, naturally you develop opinions about things. Oh, this is a good opportunity. Oh, I see somebody's doing this, but they're not doing it in the way that I would do. And you slowly start to do that. You have to kind of shift your mindset though, because if you're in the mindset of like, I'm a student at Queens and I'm going to go to dollar beers night, it's like, these are, if you're thinking about that, that's fine. But it just is like, you're not going to then be as immersed as you want to be
Yeah.
in that is going to actually make the difference. Where it's like, how much do you need to make to live in Toronto a year? Well, it's like a lot of money. And so, how are you going to pull in 30 grand a year after taxes? Like realistically, that's what you should be thinking about. And so, you need to make money. And it doesn't matter what you make money in. And how do you then have that scale up to 300,000 a year or 3 million a year? And I think a
Hmm.
lot of people get scared when you think of those numbers and they're like, oh my God, it's so daunting. It's not really. You need things that scale. And so that's even something I'm learning now of like building systems that scale really easily. The quicker you can do it, the better it is for exponential growth. Like everybody, especially Queen's finance guys, are smart. Like we know when you start investing now, that's going to compound. And so it's like you have to start early for some of this, and you have to start to build a system that's scalable that you can remove yourself off of so that it can make you money while you're not doing anything really. That's the real way to build wealth. You need to have these exponential systems in place. And that is the only thing you should be chasing when you're initially trying to set it up. So that could be skills like that, like making yourself more educated is always a good move, whether that's in incubators, whether that's talking to people, coffee chats, training, even jobs. Like that's upskilling yourself,
Yeah.
and make sure you're aware of when you hit walls or when you hit things that it's like you've done enough, that you're not growing as much as you want, and leave as quickly as you can when that's the case. Other than if you're using it to sort of get money in. But again, there are jobs where you could work 2, 3 hours a day fully remote. So if you can find those, you can probably then spend the rest of your time working on something else, and you kind of take away that avenue of stress.
That's great advice, Cameron. Thank you for that. And yeah, I know a lot of my listeners will take that advice very seriously, and hopefully it can help them with whatever they want to do with their careers. But yeah, thanks
Yeah,
so much for
good
taking the
luck,
time today,
everyone,
Pete.
I guess. Of course, man. Nice to chat with you.